All right. Hi, guys. Welcome back. So we're looking at topic 1.7, regional analysis, and this is the last topic of unit 1. Okay. So like past topics, this unit, the enduring understanding is pretty much the same. You'll be able to analyze complex issues and relationships with a distinctly spatial perspective. Right, and we're going to be looking at region as that spatial perspective in this topic. All right, so you should be able to describe different ways that geographers define regions at the end of this topic, and we're going to be looking at formal, functional, perceptual / vernacular regions. All right, or perceptional. Okay, so let's define regions again, so we can refresh our memories before we look at the type of regions. Okay, so again, a region is an area of the Earth's surface, right, that's defined on the basis of one or more distinctive characteristics or on patterns of activity. All right, and you know the map on the left is an example, right, of regions, right? And ask yourself, how do you think these regions are / were determined? Okay, because not like somebody magically just said, hey, these are the regions, right? Geographers had to have thought about it in order to put it on a map, right? So you could pause it and think about it. Okay, but one thing to know here about regions before we move on here, right? Regions, again, for geographers are a valuable tool, right? Because they serve as an organizing technique for framing knowledge of the world, right? And to help ask geographic questions, right? They help geographers also compare, right, parts of the world, right? Because when you know about different features of different regions, right, it's useful to in discussing the similarities and differences between parts of the world. Okay. So regions are often applied at two scales. Sometimes they span political states, so countries, and sometimes they can also be constrained within one political state, like the United States, right? And regions different size, right? They could be small, they could be big, right? There's no like one set size, right? And again, when we define regions, right, you know, an area of the Earth's surface with one or more common characteristics, right? These characteristics come through looking at the cultural landscape of a place, right? So culture, looking at a place's culture, religion, economic activity, physical features, right? And just for clarity's sake, we could define regions, all right, down there, right? The body of customary beliefs, material traits, social forms that create a certain tradition for a group of people, right? So culture, think of language, religion, ethnicity, food, shelter, clothing. All right, cool. That's out of the way. So we could look at the 3 types of regions, you guys. All right. So there are 3 types of regions. The first one is formal. Sometimes it's called a uniform or homogeneous region, right? And these regions are united by one or more traits, right? These regions have the way I see it, right? They have a clear beginning and end, right? They have a defined border, right? And these borders, right, don't necessarily need to be counties or states, right? They could be where certain data has been collected, right? Cool. So here's some examples for you to look at when thinking about formal regions, right? They don't need to be political boundaries, right? They could also be defined by environmental characteristics, political, social, economic, right? So think of the Sahara Desert, for example, a clear beginning and end. The Andes Mountains, a clear beginning and end, right? Think of formal regions culturally, right? Like Southwest Nigeria, speak Yoruba, I think I said it correctly, right? You think of economic formal regions, right? Like the Gold Coast of Africa. Cool. So again, formal regions are an area in which everyone shares in common one or more distinctive characteristics, right? Examples of these characteristics could include common language, economic activity, climate, distinctive boundaries, right? These formal regions are states, countries, right? But they could also be other things, right? Like if we're looking at the middle map there of the European Union, right, and we look at the countries, states of the European Union, right, that would be a formal region, right, because all of those countries are part of a group, right? And if we think about specifically in terms of economics, right, what currency do they all use? Right, they use euros, right? So so everyone there shares one common characteristic, right? One example. Cool. And again, you could think of counties, you could think of states in the United States as formal regions, clear beginning and end. Right, so those are pretty easy to define. Formal regions. Functional regions are a little bit more tricky. Functional regions, sometimes called nodal regions, right? Because these areas are organized around a focal point. All right, and we're going to be looking at some examples here in a second. Right, but these regions are defined by an activity that occurs across a region, right? And these activities can include communication, economic activities, travel. Some examples are, pizza delivery area. Here's one example for you, right? So if we find the node here, right, the centerpiece, right, it's the pizza shop. In this case, it's Lindsay's Pizza. You could also picture as Domino's Pizza if you want, right? But the node here, this would be the functional region, right? Because this is the delivery zone, this whole green circle here, right? Where the pizza shop is delivering the pizza, right? Anything outside of it, right? Not their zone because that's not where they're delivering. We could also think of a radio station, right? Like somewhere here in Portland, I don't know what radio station you could think of. I don't know, 95.5, right? The node, right, would probably be somewhere in the middle of Portland, right? And wherever they're broadcasting, right, that radio station 95.5, right, let's just say, right, it could end, I don't know, somewhere in Eugene. I'm not sure. I'm probably lying here, but right, think of that as the functional region, right? I always like to use this example here of a circle, right? Right, you could also look at TV stations, right? In this case, Iowa, right? So if we're looking at this this green circle here, right, of Omaha and Council Bluffs, right? At least 50% of households watch NBC affiliated programming. Right, the node would be Omaha, right? And this whole green circle here is the functional region, right? Because everybody here is watching NBC affiliated programming, right? Because the station is probably somewhere here in the middle. All right, we could also look at the Tri-Met rail system, right, as a functional region, right? Because in the node, again, the center is the focus of the region. In this case, right, all of the lines here are, well, in this case, we could say, downtown Portland, right, is serving as the node for all of the different lines of the Tri-Met system, right? Because they're all intersecting: the orange, the green, the yellow, the blue, and the red, right? And the Portland streetcar, right? And all of this is connecting downtown Portland to the suburbs of Portland, right? Beaverton, Hillsborough, Gresham, Clackamas. Right, so another way to think of functional region, you guys, is a certain activity being in the middle, right, dominating the center, and the more it spreads outward, right, the less important it is, right? So you could think of another example. You could think of functional regions, right, is the Wi-Fi in your house, right? Somewhere, is your Wi-Fi box, right? And if you're there, right at the node, at the center, right, connection is the strongest, right? The further you move out, the less connection you'll have, and at a certain point, right, you'll lose all connection, right? So that whole area that your Wi-Fi box or your internet box, right, is encompassing, right, that's the functional area. Another example here for you, television markets. Okay. Cool. So the third type of region here would be perceptual / vernacular, right? They're interchangeable, so use either, right? Some people like to use vernacular just to specify a little bit more. All right. But these perceptual and vernacular regions, they're defined by the informal sense of place that people ascribe to them, and they vary widely. All right. So, in other words, it's a type of region that reflects people's feelings and attitudes about a place. Right. Area of people that believe exists as part of their cultural identity. So usually these perceptual vernacular regions are created through mental mapping, right? Because people, define these, let's look at the South, for example, right? Some people, most people agree that there is an American South, right? But the region it encompasses, right? That's debatable, right? Some people think it's smaller, right, than this map here, right? The Middle East, right? That's that's up for debate, right? Based on people's experience, what they see, what they feel, right? Some people like to include Egypt as part of the Middle East, right? Even though Egypt is a part of Africa, right? Some people don't include Egypt, right? Upstate New York is another example. We could also think of the Portland, Vancouver area, right? Some people in Vancouver, right, and some people in Portland would like to think that Vancouver is part of the Portland area, even though it's in Washington, right? Some people don't, right? Other perceptual vernacular regions, right, would be, natural disasters in the United States, right? Like fires, right? Most, people, when they picture natural disasters, they might picture, not necessarily this map, right? But they have a fuzzy idea of, where fires occur in the United States. Most people agree it's on the West, the Great Plains, the Midwest, right? Tornadoes, the Gulf Coast, hurricane up north, snow, right? And some people might, move, this whole region of the United States being on fire. They might push it and make it a little bit smaller, right? For snow, of course, they might make it a little bit smaller or bigger. Tornado, some people might like to include some of it here, where Tennessee is, right? The South again is an example of a perceptual vernacular region. Some people like to think that the South is all of this. Some people like to think that it maybe, it starts here and that it ends somewhere here and that it maybe isn't necessarily all of this, right? Or we could look at this map here, right? How people are across different regions of the United States, right? Some people, you know, might think that, you know, that the the Midwest here, people are self-reliant, self-disciplined, right? People might agree, I mean, of course, with that, but also some people might think, hey, Texans are also like that, and people from Oklahoma are also like that, so we could include that there, right? Or there might be a mix of both, right? The best example is the South, in my opinion, when thinking about perceptual regions, right? Because, the South has been portrayed so much on television, through music, through film, right? In books, art, right? It's a place with environmental, cultural, and economic features that, are pretty distinct from the rest of the United States, right? But again, where this region begins and where it ends, that's all up for debate. Okay. So those are the three types of regions um, that geographers like to look at and have come to identify. All right. But it's also important to look at world regions. All right. So take a look at both of these maps here. All right. So when we're looking at the world regions, you guys, we're going to be looking at sub-Saharan Africa in the class, the Russian Federation, Europe. If we went even smaller, we'll be looking at Western Europe, Eastern Europe, North Africa, West Africa. All right. So I'm not going to ask you to memorize these regions. All right. But I just want you to take a look at these. Yeah. Okay. By the way, these are perceptual regions, right? So these world regions are not formal, they're not functional, right? Some people, some geographers might disagree with how these regions are divided. But generally speaking, at least College Board, they've come to define the world regions as such, as you see here in both maps. Okay. Sweet, guys. So regional boundaries is also something we'll be looking at a later unit, unit 4, but it's important just to get a quick glimpse at it. All right. So, obviously we defined regions. We looked at the types of regions. All right, but it's also important to recognize that regional boundaries, they change over time. They're transitional, and they overlap, and they're contested, right? So this map here you're showing, it takes you to a link here, right? Obviously you can't click on it here, but it'll take you to a website, and it's showing you all the countries in red here, right? It's showing you, right, what countries have boundaries, or places that are being contested with another country. All right. So most countries in the world, right, have some piece that they think is theirs, right? That they're debating basically, right? So let's look at some, right? Like the Crimea, for example. This is a regional area that's being contested between the Ukraine and the Russian Federation, right? Northwest Bhutan, right? That's being contested between China and Bhutan, right? Israel and the Gaza Strip, right? So Palestine and Israel, right? They've been in conflict for quite a while now, and the Gaza Strip is one of two regions, that's being contested between the two. All right. Even boundaries, parts of the ocean, right, in marine time, that's being contested as well, and that's something we'll look at too. All right, but just remember that regional boundaries can be and are being contested currently. All right. So, it goes without saying, no map is set in stone, and boundaries can change anytime. All right. But a simpler way of thinking about regional boundaries being transitional and being contested, just looking at regions across the United States, right? Obviously, some people might say the Pacific Northwest, includes, parts of California, parts of Idaho. Some people might think that it's just Oregon and Washington and this part of Canada, right? Some people might consider, this part of the United States just as the West. Some people might want to divide it as the Southwest or the Northwest. Some people think the Great Plains is encompassing all of this area. Some people think it's smaller, right? So boundaries, regions, it's all up for debate, minus the formal, right? Okay, another example here, Belize for you, right? Now I'm not going to read all this slide, right? But this is just another example of regions being contested. In this case, between Guatemala and Belize. All right, and lastly, you guys, regional analysis, right? This is something that geographers apply when looking at regions. It's very similar to scales of analysis, right? When you look at data at different scales, global, regional, national, local, when you change scales, the interpretation of the data is different, all right? And this is something you looked at 1.6, it isn't much different, right? Again, that example of deaths from cancer in the United States, right? If you were looking at the United States here, right, regionally speaking, if you were looking at the South, right, it'll tell you one thing, right? But if you zoomed into one state, in this case, Maryland, right, and then you could start looking at different regions in Maryland and making different interpretations. Then you could zoom into a city and look at different regions of that city, right, for different data. Okay. Awesome, you guys. So that's all for topic 1.7, you guys. The assignment that you have is being able to identify different different regions and being able to explain why. I think it's a lot of practice. 1.7. So yeah, if you guys have any questions and need any clarifying answers, if you have any questions, right, shoot me an email, message me on Schoology, whichever. It's totally fine. All right. Anyways, guys, take care.